Midnight in the hospital was a world apart from the daylight hours. The hallways were dimly lit, lined with machines that hummed and clicked like restless sentinels. Nurses moved softly between rooms, their footsteps cushioned by rubber soles, their voices low so as not to disturb fragile sleep. Beyond the sterile smell of antiseptic lingered something heavier, something every nurse and doctor carried silently in their hearts. The weight of lives slipping away despite all their efforts. It was into this stillness that he arrived. The tomb guard was not dressed in his ceremonial uniform, but his presence carried the same gravity. His shoulders were square, his movements deliberate, his eyes steady with the kind of focus forged from years of standing watch through storms and silence. Though out of place in a hospital ward, no one questioned him as he passed through the sliding doors. Something about the way he carried himself made people step aside instinctively, as if they sensed that he too was bound by duty. He had been called by a message that reached him through quiet channels, whispered from one veteran to another, passed like a torch until it found its way to him. A soldier lay dying in the ward, one who had once stood in the same ranks, one who had worn the uniform with pride, but whose battles had ended not on the field, but in the slow collapse of his body. The guard did not know him personally, but that did not matter. Brotherhood in service was not built on familiarity, but on the oath that one would never be left behind. As he entered the ward, the fluorescent lights flickered faintly above rows of beds. Some patients slept fitfully, their faces pale against white sheets. Others stared into the darkness, lost in pain or memory. But in the farthest corner, near a window that looked out into the quiet city streets, lay the soldier. His breaths were shallow, each one a fragile thread holding him to life. Tubes and wires surrounded him, the rhythmic beeping of monitors counting down time with merciless precision. Doctors had done all they could. Nurses had tended with care, but medicine could only carry a man so far. What remained now was not treatment but dignity, not cure but presence. And so, when the tomb guard approached, the staff looked at him with a mixture of surprise and recognition. They did not know his name, but they knew his role. They had seen him once or twice on television, perhaps standing motionless in the rain before the tomb, and in that moment they seemed to understand why he was there. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his eyes resting on the frail figure before him. The dying soldier's skin was pale, his lips cracked, his gaze flickering weakly toward the newcomer. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that needed no words. The patient's chest rose in a labored breath, and with great effort, his lips formed a whisper. He stepped closer, pulling a chair beside the bed, and lowered himself into it with the same deliberate precision he used when assuming position at the tomb. For the first time in years, his duty was not to stand motionless in front of crowds, but to sit, to remain present for one man alone. Minutes passed in silence. Machines beeped, the clock ticked, nurses moved quietly at the edges of the room. Yet in that silence lay a profound presence. The guard did not speak, did not fill the air with platitudes. He simply sat, his posture straight, his gaze steady, his hand resting gently atop the soldier's arm. It was the same stillness he had practiced for countless hours at the tomb, but here it became something different. The dying man's breathing eased, as though the weight of loneliness had lifted slightly. His eyes fluttered open again, and in them was gratitude. He knew he would not die unseen. He would not slip away into the night without a witness, without someone to carry his memory. For in that guard's presence, he felt the weight of an entire brotherhood, silent but unyielding, promising that he would not be forgotten. The doctors at the nurses' station noticed. One by one, as they moved between patients, they found themselves pausing at the doorway, drawn by the quiet gravity in the corner of the ward. Some had spent decades in medicine, hardened by the routine of death, but what they saw here was different. It was not clinical. It was not professional detachment. It was sacred, in its own way, the merging of duty and love, the kind of loyalty that transcends words. One nurse whispered to another, "He hasn't moved in over an hour." The other nodded, eyes glistening. "That's his way. He stands for the dead. Tonight, he's sitting for the living." Time slipped by unnoticed. Outside, the city grew quieter. the occasional siren fading into distance. Inside, the guard remained at the soldier's side, his hand never leaving that frail arm, his gaze never wandering. The patient stirred now and then, whispering fragments of memory, names of friends, flashes of battles, the image of a home long gone. And each time, the guard listened, his silence affirming that these memories mattered, that they would not vanish unspoken. At one point, the soldier whispered, "Will they remember me?" His voice cracked like dry leaves, fragile and fading. The guard leaned slightly closer, his voice deep and steady. "Yes, I will remember. And others will too. You are not alone." The dying man's lips curved faintly, the hint of a smile ghosting across his face. He closed his eyes, his breathing uneven but calmer now. In that moment, the machines and tubes no longer defined him. He was not just a patient. He was a soldier, a brother, a man whose life had meaning, and someone was there to bear witness to that truth. The doctors felt tears prick at their eyes. They had seen countless families hold vigil, had seen clergy offer prayers, but this was different. This was the presence of a comrade, one who asked nothing, one who simply gave himself in silence. It was loyalty distilled to its purest form. As the hour grew late, the guard did not waver. Midnight bled into morning, but he remained, the weight of his vow anchoring him in that chair. And though the outcome was certain, though death hovered near, there was no despair in his stillness. There was only honor. The ward was silent, except for the faint hum of machines and the soft shuffling of nurses on their rounds. Midnight had long passed, yet the guard remained unmoving in the chair by his comrade's bed. His hand still rested gently on the frail arm of the dying soldier, his presence a shield against loneliness. Hours of training on parade grounds, hours of standing through storms, had prepared him for this vigil not as ceremony, but as brotherhood. The dying man stirred again, his eyelids fluttering. His lips trembled as he whispered a name, perhaps of a friend, perhaps of a loved one long gone. The words were slurred, fading, but the guard leaned close enough to catch them, holding them like treasures. He did not correct, did not interrupt, but allowed the soldier to wander through his memories, to relive in fragments what had made his life whole. At one point, the soldier whispered of laughter in the barracks, of firelight in the desert, of rain pounding on tin roofs. He spoke of comrades who had fallen, voices that still echoed in his head. "I see them," he murmured. "They're waiting." His breathing grew labored, but his eyes held peace. The guard's throat tightened, but his face remained steady. He spoke softly, each word carrying the solemnity of an oath. "They will welcome you, and I will stay until you go." The dying man's grip tightened faintly on his hand, a gesture of thanks too deep for words. The doctor on duty, standing quietly near the doorway, turned away, blinking back tears. He had seen soldiers pass before, but never with such quiet dignity, never with another standing sentinel beside them, as if death itself were being honored. Minutes bled into hours. Outside the ward's window, the first hints of dawn touched the sky, painting it in faint shades of gray. Inside, the rhythm of machines began to falter. The beeping grew erratic, a harsh reminder of the body's surrender. Nurses gathered quietly, their presence respectful, their hands ready but their faces solemn. They knew intervention now was futile. What mattered was not to prolong but to dignify. The guard felt the change before the machines announced it. He leaned closer, lowering his head until his voice was almost a whisper meant only for the man before him. "Rest now. You are not forgotten." The soldier's final breath came as a soft sigh, barely audible, and then the room fell into a silence deeper than any before. The monitor gave its last tone, a steady line stretching across the screen. A nurse pressed the button to silence the alarm, her eyes wet. The doctors bowed their heads. The guard did not move. He remained seated, his hand still resting on the arm that was now still, his gaze fixed forward, unflinching, his posture steady as though continuing the watch even after life had left. For long minutes he remained that way, embodying the vow that no soldier dies alone, that even in their last moment, they are accompanied by loyalty and respect. Finally, with the first light of dawn slipping through the window, the guard rose. His movements were deliberate, each gesture carrying reverence. He adjusted the blanket over the soldier's body, smoothing it with the same care he gave to the folds of the flag at the tomb. Then he brought his hand to his brow in a slow salute, holding it for several breaths before lowering it again. The doctors and nurses watched in silence, their own throats tight, their hearts heavy but moved. Some had served in uniform before their medical careers. Others had only read of such bonds in history books. But all of them felt the truth of what they had witnessed. It was not a performance, not a ritual for the public eye. It was love, stripped bare of words, expressed through loyalty that did not fade with death. One of the younger nurses, her cheeks streaked with tears, whispered, "I've never seen anything like that." The older doctor beside her nodded slowly. "That's what it means to keep watch. Not just at a tomb, at life's end too." As the body was prepared to be taken to the morgue, the guard stepped aside, his face still calm but his eyes shadowed by grief. Before leaving the ward, he placed a hand briefly on the doorframe, as though sealing the moment into memory. He carried no notes, no speeches, no photographs, only the certainty that he had kept his promise. Another soldier had not faced death alone. News of the vigil spread quietly at first, whispered among hospital staff, passed along to families. A doctor mentioned it at home, a nurse told her neighbor, and soon the story traveled beyond the ward. It was not reported with flashing headlines or sensational angles, but it reached people nonetheless. Each retelling carried the same essence. A guard had entered a hospital at midnight, and in his silent vigil, he had reminded the living of what it meant to honor the dead. Veterans who heard the story felt a lump in their throats. Families who had lost loved ones found comfort in imagining that same presence at their bedside. And even those who had never served felt a stirring, an awakening to the truth that dignity in death is as sacred as dignity in life. For the guard, the story was not about him. He returned to his post at the tomb as he always did, standing in silence through rain and sun, his face unflinching, his body unyielding. He no longer stood only for those entombed beneath marble, but also for the soldier whose hand he had held, for the doctors and nurses who had shed tears, for the families who needed to know that respect endures even when no cameras are present. Yet within him, the memory of that night stayed, shaping his silence into something richer. Weeks later, during a stormy afternoon watch, the guard felt raindrops stream down his face. He did not flinch, did not move, but in his heart, he replayed that night in the ward. He remembered the labored breath, the final whisper, the weight of a hand fading in his own. And in that memory, he drew strength. His silence was not emptiness. It was filled with voices, with promises, with love that death could not erase. The takeaway was clear. Honor is not measured in speeches or medals, but in presence. Sometimes it is a sentinel at a tomb. Sometimes it is a hand held in the quiet of a hospital ward. Always it is the refusal to let anyone be forgotten. And so the story of that night continues to echo not in headlines, but in hearts. It tells us to pause, to remember, to stand with one another not only in life's triumphs, but in its final, fragile moments. For when we do, we carry forward the dignity that defines us, the gratitude that binds us, and the love that even death cannot silence.